It's hour 3 of lesson 3 for Intro to Web. So we want to finish off building our dynamic grid. So we've created a table. Our table is empty. So we're going to need, just like on our previous page, we're going to need a for each loop. So again, we want to loop through our games variable, and I'm going to call each individual record a game. You're free to use other variable names. If you don't like mine, that's fine. Use your own. Whatever makes the most sense to you is fine. So now, for each game, what is the very first thing we want to output to the page? So we've created a table heading. Our query's got the first game. What's the very first thing we should print out to the page? Remember, we're printing out a combination of HTML wrapping as well as the actual PHP values from the database. So what's going to be printed out first for every game? Name. Okay, so name will be the first value we want to print to the page, but name's not going to be the very first thing we should echo out. We're going to use an echo command. What do we need to print before we display the name of each game? Yeah, what we want. So what tag will give us a new line inside the table? So we want to create a new row. Right here in the comments. Create a new table row for each game. So now we've created a new row, and then we need to create something else, some other wrapping or packaging before we get to the name. What tag will go inside of the TR tag? So now we also want to create a new column. So create a new row and create the first column. And now how do I concatenate on the name and put it in the first column? So we'll put in a dot for concatenate. And how do we now reference the name of that game? Same way we did it on the last page. Well, we will need name, but we'll need something around it. What variable holds the current record in our loop? Right, we're going to need to reference our game variable. And then inside of it, we'll refer to that. So this is then going to print the name into the first column. What do we do? What do we need on our page after the name gets printed? So we're going to concatenate on. We need to close that first column. Now I'm going to break this echo command is going to get long. Rather than running it across the page, I find it's cleaner to put a new line for every column. So what happens, and I'll indent it so we can see it's part of the same command. What will we output next? We've created a row, we've created a column, we've put the name inside, and we've closed that first column. So now we want a second TD. What happens after we create that second column? So now we want to append on, from our game array, we want the age limit value. What do we do next after we print the age limit into the second column? Yep. Close the column, and I'll get rid of that single quote because I'm going to continue on to the next line. Then we're going to do the same thing 2 more times. We're going to create the third column and put the release date value in. We're going to close the third column. Then we're going to create the fourth column and put the size column in. So now I have my third column on line 35. Then I output the size column what else do we need? We need one more thing. What do we need after we close the size column?
Semicolon.
We will need a semicolon, yep, but we need something else. We need to close the row, right? For each game, we're going to start a new row at the beginning, and after we've output the 4 values in table cells, we need to close that row. And now, as Mahesh said, now we need that semicolon at the end. So I'll translate this all to English. One step at a time. For every game, create a new row. Create a new column and put the game inside of the first column. Close column 1. Create a second column. Display the age limit inside that column and close column 2. Open a third column, display the release date inside and close the third column. Open a fourth column, print out the game size in the fourth column, close the fourth column, and then finish that row because that game record is complete. We've displayed all the values and we don't want the new game, next game to appear on the same line, but we want to start another line. This should be all the code that we need to get our 4-column grid. So whenever we're building tables, the only things that change are what column headings do we have, how many sets of TD tags, and what are the different values we're putting into that TD. I'm going to re-upload games, and if I refresh now we've got a fully dynamic page. We're displaying all the content in our database. If I want to go back and add one more game, maybe I'll do that. Just go to game for a minute so we can. Somebody else want to give me one other game you like to play? We should add to the database. Sorry? War of God, okay. Age limit? 18. Release date? Okay. Size? 35? Okay. So I'm going to add one more. I still have my video games table page here. So as soon as I hit save, tells me my game is saved, I can immediately go back to my games, and now it's here, right? So this page is always a live window into our database. This is why you go back to Facebook and you refresh your news feed, right? Because there's always new things getting added to the database, and you want to see what's been added in there currently. So our content is dynamic. It will always match exactly what's in our database. So we always have current, up-to-date data.
The line that you had us add to display errors is giving me an error and won't be running. I think just the set attributes.
Here, check it against mine here. Now, some of you may get an error in your code that says unexpected end. Does anybody have that error? Unexpected end? You have one? It says Okay, so your name, age limit, and release date are showing up, but size is not? Okay, when you check in Workbench, does it show up? Run the query in Workbench and see what you get.
I had the same thing, and I made a mistake when I wrote a game.
If something doesn't show up, if it's a blank, then you probably haven't named it correctly in your PHP code. The name in your PHP code doesn't match the name in the database. If you ever get an error that says unexpected end, what that means usually is you opened a bracket or quote and you didn't close it. So let's say I leave out on age limit, I'm going to leave out a quote. If I upload this, I should get an unexpected end error, which, yeah, oh, well, unexpected. So unexpected means it found code where PHP was expecting a bracket or quote to be closed. It got opened but never closed. So that's what I did here. I opened my single quote. I forgot to close it. So that will crash things.
Can I just see that line of code one more time?
Sure.
Instead of adding CSS and making the table look pretty, could we add buttons to jump between the pages? So like to go from the video game table to go to the ad, and then from that, once you add it, it says game saved, to go back to adding games and to table.
We'll later on what we'll do is next week what we're going to do is
Control or functionality.
well, next week what we want to do with this game, right now we're only using it for creating.
Right.
Sorry, not next week. In a couple weeks we're going to look at doing update and delete. So notice how this is, so here's my ad page. Notice the URL, right? So eventually we'll build it with a common navigation so I can always jump back. And my movies page has exactly what you're talking about. I've got a link, but notice when I click edit, it actually takes me to the same page. Right? So rather than build two separate pages, one for adding games and one for editing, all the fields are the same. Most of the code for doing a create and an update is the same. We're just going to modify the SQL query. So we can just repurpose this page and use it for adding and editing. And yes, we'll add a link. Eventually, we'll look at adding a nav bar as well so we can navigate around. Yes, that's exactly where we're going and why I built this out, so you can kind of see where we're going to go with it. But you're thinking in the right. So we are going to want to add CSS as well, because the CSS will make our table, rather than have it look like this, the CSS allows our table to look like this, which is useful. In fact, we can probably do that part now. We can add in some simple CSS. So I'm going to take out this border equals 1. Rather than using border equals 1, we'll do our styling a different way. If I take that out and re-upload, you'll notice our border's gone, right? So now we have no border without that attribute. What I want to do is make my table look like this one instead. Now it's hard for you to see, well actually you may be able to see that these are also alternating colors on the table background. So there's a few different ways we can do our CSS. This isn't a CSS class, so I don't want to spend time writing our own style sheets. So I didn't write any of the style sheet here. I just use an existing CSS framework, which is available for free. So what we're going to do is use that in class. Has anybody worked with any CSS frameworks before? Or know of any? Yeah, so some of you have used Bootstrap. That's what I'm going to use here. Okay? So as we build out this application, you can see the header, footer, this is all, I mean, it looks like Bootstrap. For those of you who haven't seen Bootstrap, here's their website. So it's basically simple CSS for people who know how to program websites but don't know a lot or don't have the time to write their own CSS. We can just use theirs. This is open source. They've got some different themes and some examples here. So these links that we need, here's the code we need. I've actually put these links on Blackboard for you already. So what I'm going to do is go on to Blackboard, I'm going to grab the Bootstrap links to their style sheet, and I'm going to add them to my games page so we can use Bootstrap for styling. So where do you find these? I'm going to use Bootstrap every week from now on. So in the links, tools, and resources in weekly learning, if you scroll down, I think I put them here. Yeah, right near the bottom, it says Bootstrap CSS link. So there's 2 CSS files. This is the latest version. There's also a JavaScript file, which we don't really need, but we'll grab anyway. So just go into Blackboard, into tools and resources. just copy those 6 lines. Okay, so in weekly learning, in the tools and resources folder, and it's the second item from the bottom, it says Bootstrap CSS links. So I'm just going to highlight and copy those 6 lines, and then what I want you to do is paste those into the head section of your games page. It doesn't really matter if it's above or below the title tag. So just copy those lines. So when I refresh my games page now, so you'll notice the font change. We've got the default Bootstrap font already.
What did you take out of your PHP code to make the grid go away? Oh, the border.
Yeah, we took out, in the table tag, we had border equals 1. So we can already tell it's using the Bootstrap CSS because you can see the difference in the font, right? When we use no style sheet, we get Times New Roman as the default font, and now we get, if I inspect my element, the default Bootstrap font, which is Helvetica. That's the font that it's using by default now. Now my table doesn't look very good, does it? I want my table to span the entire page, and I want it to have that nice alternating background colors. Well, Bootstrap gives me a couple classes. So where we took out border equals 1, I'm going to add this instead. I'm going to add class equals table, and then table dash striped. So this is quick and dirty CSS, right? We're not writing our own, we're just leveraging what Bootstrap gives us. So we can build an application that looks better without spending the time to write our own CSS right now. So we can focus on the PHP code. So I've just added what's highlighted in blue. Class equals table space table dash striped. Into the head set, anywhere in between the opening and closing head tags of the page. Well, you have an opening head tag, don't you? Anywhere between the opening and the closing head tag, it can go. So if I re-upload, Liz, I'll show you in just a second. When I refresh, now my table spans the page, and I've got alternating colors. Liz, to show you where it is, it's here. Here are my head tags. I just put it underneath the title. Those are the 6 links. The 6 lines. Here, I've made that bigger. So, Tyler, to come back to your question from before, when we get to updating, we're also going to add these links to our game page, so we've got styles and we can format. So this page is untouched, right? It hasn't changed. I can refresh it, it's still the same. We're not using Bootstrap here. We'll add Bootstrap here in a couple weeks. We'll leave this alone for today.
Okay.
But we've got now our games page. So Liz, can you see here where it goes? You got it? Okay. So there's our games table. So whenever we're building a grid, and you guys are going to have a lab this week where you're going to have to build another grid, I'm going to give you your first assignment next week. You're going to have to build a grid, and when you do your assignment 2 and on your midterm, we'll be building these grids constantly. So you're going to get good at it because you're going to get a lot of practice. And like I said, the process is the same. The only things that are ever different are our SQL query and the names of the column headings and the names of the values we're printing out. Everything else is the same whenever we're building a grid of data. So once we understand how this works, we can query any table and show what's in that table online. Are there any questions about any of the code on this page, anything we've done here? If there's no questions, I want to build 2 other quick pages. What I want to do next is build code that's similar to what we had here, our game names, but instead of just printing the game names on the page, one of the important things we need to know how to do when we're reading data is how to fill a drop-down list, right? You'll probably never build a web application that doesn't have dynamic drop-down lists, where the data comes from a table in our database. So we're going to want to build the drop-down with the name of our games, so the user could pick a game name that way. So let's go ahead and make one new file. We'll make a new PHP file. We'll just call this game dropdown.php. So I called it game-dropdown. Delete my code and put in my standard HTML, which will start to get mind-numbingly familiar for you. We won't bother with Bootstrap on this page. This is just kind of a demo page. It won't really be part of our little video game application. That's okay, no learning going on here. So all our standard HTML we've put on all of our pages. Save this one. And I'll open and close PHP tags. Now our drop-down list is a form control. We talked about different form controls last week. So what we want on this page is just a label to the user that says, you know, select the game. We want a drop-down list with the games, and we just want a button that they can click, and on the next page we'll just show whatever game they picked. So because we've got inputs, we're going to need a form, right? Inputs won't work if we can't submit them to the server without a form. So above my PHP tag, we'll create a form. What two attributes do we want to set on the form? Yeah, we want the action. So our action can be, we'll just call it, I don't know, show dropdown.php, kind of a goofy name, but it'll work. And what method do we want? Always. Yeah, we want to pick post. And then I'm going to move my end form tag down here, because we'll need PHP inside of the form in order to create that dynamic drop-down list. I'll put on a label. With some text that says select a game. Now, what type of HTML control do we use to generate a drop-down menu? I'll give you a hint, it's not drop-down. That would be nice. We want an HTML select tag. So we'll give it a name of name, because that's what we're going to be showing. We'll give it an ID of name. My code editor is now generating an end select tag. I'm going to move this down here. So my PHP code needs to go inside the menu so we can use PHP to populate the names of the game. And then after my select, I'll also just add a button that says submit. So I can upload this page. My drop-down's going to show up, but there's not going to be anything in it. We're just going to have a blank drop-down list. I'll upload it this way, and we could just make sure so far what we've got on here is okay. So I'll just upload my game drop down and check it out. Okay, so here's our empty drop down. So we've got the menu, but we haven't connected it up to our database. So the things that we did here, actually, it would be pretty more similar to this page. It's not so similar to this one, because we're not showing everything. So we want to take these same values, but rather than just printing them out on the page as HTML, each one of these needs to be a choice in our menu. So now in here, we're going to, what are the steps are going to be involved in doing this? Yep, so we'll connect. And lastly, at the bottom, we'll disconnect. Yep. What else do we do? So we want the names of those games to appear in the drop-down. And every game is a new choice. What happens after we connect? Yep. We'll have to set up and run the query. I guess we could say setup, run the query, store the results. So we've connected to the database, we've run our query, we've got those in memory. How do we then take those and create a new list, a new choice in our drop-down? Right, if we've got 6 games, we want 6 choices. 60 games, we want 60 choices. Yep, so we'll need to loop. So loop through each game. Display a new choice in the menu. What does anybody know what HTML tags, what set of tags live inside of select for every item? Yeah, we're going to create an option, an end option tag around the names of the game. So again, we're just changing the HTML wrapping or packaging. All the rest of our code's the same. Connect, run a query, store the results, loop through it, and disconnect. The only thing that's different is this time, on this page we wrapped our data in a set of table tags, TRs, TDs, and tables. This time we're wrapping it into a drop-down, so we're using select and option instead. So here we go. Again, most of this code we've already done. I don't expect you to be able to remember it yet, but you will. The more you do it, the more you'll remember. So we'll connect, we'll turn on debugging. What's our SQL query going to be to populate our drop-down? Yeah, we'll just select name. So far this code is identical to what we have on game names. The next 3 lines are going to be identical as well. Prepare the command. Oops, this should be an equal sign. So set up our command, run the query. So these 6 lines are identical here and here.
Just a question. You probably went through it before, but just a refresher.
Sure.
CMD equals con prepare. What's prepare? What's that line do?
What it does, it basically binds our connection and our SQL command together. Now, we don't for this example, we technically could run our query without the command, and you might see examples where we're doing it without the command. The benefit of the command comes back to our save, right? Because we talked last week about by naming our parameter specifically, we could prevent SQL injection and deal with special characters. So we don't need it, but it's just best practice. Now, we could say, well, here, we're not passing anything in. Like, there's no parameters to bind, there's no special characters or SQL injection to run, so we don't really need that. That's true. However, if we had a where clause on here, we didn't want all of them. So for example, on this page, let me go back to my movie page. Right. Here we're running a query, but there's a where clause, which means a user could change that to drop table, or here we're running a query with a where clause. We don't want all the movies, we only want the ones where the word black is somewhere in the title.
Right.
So I'm setting it up for when we get here that I'm not going to teach you one way of doing it today and then a different way of doing it here. So we don't really need the command, it's just kind of good practice.
Okay.
We could just, the connection does have a method. So if I do this, connection has a method called query. So we could just execute it that way if we wanted to. I'm trying to use best practices.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But that's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so now we'll do our for each loop. Again, this is the same. I'll move this comment inside my loop. And actually, I just may as well add my line to disconnect right now so we don't forget. We'll set our connection equal to null down at the bottom. So all of our code here is identical to game names. There's only one line of code that's going to be different. So we're going to echo. We said we're going to open an option tag. That will create a new item in the dropdown. And then what do we put into that option? What value should show up here? We want to take our game array and print out the name. So stick the name of each video game in there. And then what happens after we print the name out? We want to close the option tag, so we'll now append on a closing tag. There's our drop down. So our code, our process and logic is identical on all of these pages. We've just used different HTML wrappers around our values. So when I try my drop down now, okay. Here's the problem. My button didn't show up. Now, I didn't get an error, but clearly something went wrong. If I view the source, I can actually see the error. What did I do wrong? It says no such file or directory. We can put a value in, but if we don't have to, it's not required.
Didn't you use show drop down instead of game dash drop down for your for your form action?
Yeah, but we're not even working with the action right now. It should just load the form. Ah. I did? Okay, just a second.
Yeah.